So this is the second day of this 7-day sesshin here at Mountain Gate in northern New Mexico in September 2021. And I'd like to share with you today and comment on the teachings of Yamada Mumon Roshi, who was an eminent Zen master in the Rinzai sect. He died in 1981, I think, something like that. And he was the teacher of Mitra-roshi, with whom I've been training since 1991, and also of Daichi Priscilla Storant, who is also a Roshi and a good friend of mine. Mitra-roshi and Chi-san, as we call her, were both training together under Yamada Mumon Roshi in the temple in Kobe, Japan, and Mitra-roshi was his successor, and Chi-san is a successor of Mitra-roshi. Three incredible human beings, really. And Chi-san is, they're both stuck in Japan because the coronavirus. There was to have been a sesshin in September at Tahoma Monastery here in the States with Mitra-roshi, but it was not possible. It was not acceptable in the state to have that kind of gathering because it was going to be a full house, 40 people in the Zendo, and everybody was going to have to be masked. I don't think anybody was going to have to be masked, but everybody was to be fully vaccinated. Still, at the same time, with the Delta variant being so strong and causing breakthrough infections for people, and both Mitra-roshi and Chi-san, who would be his translator, being up there in age and both having health issues, although recently Mitra-roshi had his annual physical. He had had open heart surgery several years ago, and he's been given a clean bill of health and says that next year he'll be at Tahoma in September. Chi-san's situation is more genetic. She does have to rest significantly, and I hope they both live a very long life because they're both very precious human beings and very gifted human beings in terms of working with people. Mitra-roshi, of course, is the abbot of Sogenji and also the senior abbot of Tahoma Monastery and also the senior abbot of Hokuozan, which is the European gathering place in Germany. It was set up many years ago by a senior student of Mitra-roshi's who will also become a successor, because Roshi felt that so many, I believe he's got students in every single country in the European Union, as well as England and the Middle East and Latin America. And I don't know that there are any yet in Africa, but most likely there are, and as well as the United States, Mexico, and many of the countries in Europe, having been part of the Russian Empire, are very poor and don't have the resources to have their own monasteries. And so he felt that if there was a central place, a central place to hold sesshin in Europe, in a more wealthy country, that people could gather there and have sesshin there and support that place. And that place is Hokuozan, which full name is Hokuozan Sogenji. And he has been going there, giving sesshin to 70 people at a time, Apparently the rules are more lax in Europe. I don't know what the deal is. Time to loosen up the phlegm in my throat. I have a condition that has caused me to dry out. And so I have dry eyes and dry nose and dry throat and dry lots of other things. But as we get older, things begin to let go, whether we want them to or not. At any rate, I started to talk about this book called Zen Master Hakuin's Song of Zazen, and it's a collection of Mumon Roshi's talks. Some of them actually speaking directly to the Hakuin's Song of Zazen. Others just talking, working to inspire his students. The book, unfortunately, is only available extremely limited numbers in Japan. It's not being exported, although I sure hope that that changes, because this is quite a wonderful book. And it was gifted to me by a dear friend who is a translator. The book is translated by Norman Waddell. Norman Waddell has lived in Japan for many decades, and as a matter of fact, he's in his 70s, at least at this point, and is married to a Japanese woman who has the most amazing voice I've ever heard. He's an incredible translator of Japanese to English, and he's also a super aficionado of Hakuin. He has translated many of Hakuin's writings, if not all of them. And they are beautiful translations. It is felt that he's actually caught Hakuin's personality in his translations, which is something that a really gifted translator can do, but lesser translators have a much harder time with. They may translate literally and not get the spirit of the writing. But Norman Waddell gets, he's beautiful, and he's a very humble man. He's a university professor, although I think he's retired at this point, and utterly dedicated to translating. Has translated a number of books, not just Hakuin, and not just this one of Yamada Mumon. The translation of Hakuin's Rohatsu exhortations that we share during Rohatsu sesshin were translated by him. I met him many years ago at a talk on Hakuin in Kyoto, and then on another visit to Japan, had tea with him. So I'd like to share this one particular essay in this book called Pointing Straight at the Mind. He quotes, "Illness is cured naturally. The physician merely aids the process." These are famous words of the ancient Greek physician Hippocrates, the father of Western medicine. Shakyamuni taught using precisely the same method. Extraordinary, extraordinary. Living beings all possess the virtues of the Tathagata's wisdom. They fail to realize only because of their delusions and attachments. Hippocrates enunciates the fundamental principles of physical health, Shakyamuni that of spiritual salvation. Not even the most skillful physician can save a person whose vital life force is exhausted, and in the same way, the greatest religious teacher cannot lead to Buddhahood someone who lacks the Buddha nature. But everybody has the Buddha nature. Perhaps this is the difference. Except that what he's pointing out, as you already understand, is that it's up to us. something fundamental in the healing of human beings. If the karma is there, if the intention is there, even the most amazing things can happen. I recently got a book, which I have not yet opened the cover of, titled Cured. And it's stories of people who never should have survived physical illness, but miraculously did so. There's a saying that comes up so frequently in my mind with regard to Zen practice, and particularly as a teacher, and that is, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. You can offer an optimal setting. You can offer the tools through which to come to awakening. You can offer opportunities such as this one, the sesshin, in which people can set aside their daily work and go deeper. But until a person is ready to make that commitment, the challenge is so challenging that many people quit along the way. Roshi Kepler used to talk about a group of people, an enormous crowd of people who were setting out to go to the top of the mountain. And they were walking up this path together, and they got to a high promontory, and there was a beautiful view. And they were oohing and awing about this view. And some of them are just hung out and stayed to enjoy that particular view. The rest of the group continued on to a higher part of the mountain. There was another even more spectacular view. And again, some of them just stayed there. By the time the group got to the top of the mountain, there were only a handful of people left. Everybody else stopped short. People come to Zen for lots of different reasons. Often it's these days out of a sense of suffering. And once they get some level of relief from that suffering, the motivation to continue drops away and they quit. I've seen this happen many, many, many times over. Decades ago, Roshi Kepler's heyday at the Rochester Zen Center, there were 300 plus people every Sunday morning for the Sunday morning sitting and teisho. And I began to realize that of these 300 and some people, only about 30 actually were consistent and continued week after week after week. The rest was a changing sea of faces. Zen practice is not easy, but if we persist, it brings incredible results. It can bring nothing short of full liberation. Everyone has the seed of Buddhahood within us. We're born with it. We are it. There's nowhere it isn't. But we have to realize that. And because of the various different things that happen in our life, we develop a self-image that we feel that has to be supported, it has to be defended. It's who we are, and we cling to it tenaciously. Despite the pain and suffering that it brings, because it is attached to this self-image that we are running into pain and suffering. Who we are is so incredible, so amazing. But who we think we are, who we assume we are, rigidifies and results in pain and suffering. So to continue, find my place here. None of a physician's medicines can do more than make that strength work to greater effect. An unenlightened person sunk deeply in here the word is sin, but I don't like that word because it has a real pejorative sense in our culture. It's more like it is unaware functioning. It's being caught in stuff and doing things that are not necessarily as helpful or kind or whatever as we are capable of. But the world is full of this, and it's driven by this self-image. An unenlightened person sunk deeply in sin, in whatever that would be, and worldly passions achieves peace of mind and Buddhahood because the Buddha nature is inherent in that person from birth. A teacher can only help encourage that person to self-awaken to that intrinsic nature. Hence, it can be said without exaggeration that the brief line, quote, all beings from the first are Buddha, close quote, and Haluin's Song of Zazen embodies the fundamental principle of the Buddha's Dharma, and that if you truly understand these words, the Buddha Dharma is yours. Great teachers, beginning with Shakyamuni, who have transmitted the Dharma, down through the centuries, exerted all their effort, making this simple truth known to as many people as possible. Of all the Buddhist schools, Zen had the clearest doctrine of all, pointing straight at the mind of persons, seeing the self-nature, attaining Buddhahood. No recourse to expedient means, just straight and direct, pointing to human beings' fundamental nature, clearly revealing it and becoming Buddha straight away. After Kanzon Eigen, the founder of Myoshinji in Kyoto, and Myoshinji is a major Rinzai headquarters temple, and was so powerful and so deep in the training of people that there are actually consists of 44 temples, a main temple and many sub-temples. It's traditional in Japanese Zen when a student is authorized to teach that a small temple is built on the property of the main temple that they were training at for them to teach at. And that was the case at Myoshinji. It's also the case at Sogenji. There are three little temples at Sogenji. All but one of them, which is very recent, had separated out and were no longer part of Sogenji. There was a major change in the Meiji Reformation with Buddhism in Japan, and many temples failed because support was withdrawn, monks and nuns were killed, and the whole thing changed. One of the changes, which I think some people don't understand, when they wonder why Zen monks could fight in the Second World War, is that all differentiation of monks was removed, and monks were considered actually lay people by the government in Japan these days. So they could be conscripted for war duty, and they're taxed, and they're ordinary people from the perspective of the government. And it really took an enormous bite out of Buddhism in Japan. So of all the Buddhist schools, Zen had the clearest doctrine, pointing straight at the mind of human beings, seeing the self-nature and attaining Buddhahood. No recourse to expedient means, just straight and direct, pointing to human beings' fundamental nature, clearly revealing it and becoming Buddha straight away. If it were that quick, that would be wonderful, but there's a lot of work involved. After Kanzan Eigen, the founder of Myoshinji in Kyoto, completed his practice under Daito Kokushi, that's national teacher Daito, he disappeared into the mountains of Ibuka in Mino province to engage in post-Satori practice and, quote, nurture the sacred embryo, close quote. This is a very, very important part of practice. The misunderstanding in the West is that you get Kensho and you're home free. But as Roshi Kapleau has pointed out, and other teachers have as well, Kensho is a beginning. Even within the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, Kalu Rinpoche, some of whose teachings have been gathered in a book called A Flash of Lightning in the Dark Night, wrote that having, he didn't call it Kensho, but it was Kensho experience, is like, it's as if you're making your way in the pitch black dark up a mountain path, and you're tripping over rocks and you're in danger of sliding down the mountain, and you get caught in brambles and all kinds of things like that. And then there's a flash of lightning, and all of a sudden you can see the path ahead of you briefly. And that's what a Kensho is like. You awaken initially to some level of depth of understanding of the truth with a capital T. And it is freeing up to a point. Unfortunately, it frees up our inhibitions at certain levels too. So we are likely to do things that are inappropriate. And then we see this happening in historic and in modern Western temples. And so it's vital to continue training. You can see what needs to be done. And if you ignore that, if you try to deny it, you're going to be worse off than before you had the Kensho experience. To truly do Zen practice, we need to do it in an ongoing manner, continuing to deepen. And as we begin to become aware of where we're caught, to work with those stuck places, as Jisun calls them. Sometimes it means getting the help of a therapist could make a big difference in removing some of those blockages. Other times, just stalwart work on our own can make a difference. There's a kind of a wide overlap between psychotherapy and Zen practice. And it's an important overlap in helping people to become truly awake. As I said, we can have a Kensho experience and it'll give us some level of insight. But first of all, it's a shallow level of insight, and there's far deeper we can go and far freer we can become. But sometimes people get a second head on their shoulders, thinking that they've accomplished something amazing and incredible. That alone means that they haven't really gone very deep. Because if you have a deep enough Kensho, and it's still not the deepest, you understand that, well, of course it's like this. This is not anything special, and yet it's incredible. And it brings up a deeper level of compassion and wisdom and understanding, and you find yourself not wanting to cause pain and suffering to people, wanting to help people free themselves in whatever they can do. And this is important. Unfortunately, there are teachers even now who have gotten stuck halfway. There's a koan really about this. The buffalo passes through the window Its head, horns, and feet pass through, but its tail doesn't. What is that tail about? When people don't complete that passage through the window, they are, one might even say they're dangerous. And there have been unfortunate abuses in the Zen communities in America, and not just with foreign teachers, but with American teachers as well. And it's an enormous burden to everyone who believes in Zen, because it destroys people's faith in the practice and causes a great deal of suffering. And I won't go into details, but there are way too many of them. So Kanzan Eigen took himself off into Mino province and did post-satori practice. For 8 years, he devoted himself to helping the local villagers, returning each night to his grass hut and devoting himself to Zazen. When Daito died, Emperor Hanazono, in accordance with Daito's final wishes, initiated a search for Eigen, circulating a description of him throughout the country. And finally, discovering that Eigen was living in Mino province, Hanazono dispatched the counselor Kanroji Chunagon to summon Eigen to the palace. Eigen made various excuses to refuse the emperor's request, but in the end, unable to go against his teacher Daito's final instructions, he relented and returned to the capital. The simple villagers of Ibuka were astonished. They'd been unaware that the beggar monk living among them was a celebrated priest. They had treated him as a menial servant, working him hard, and they felt deeply ashamed. Saddened to see him leave, they gathered to send him off and accompanied him for many miles along the way. They declared that they would go with him all the way to Seki Post Station, nearly half the distance to Kyoto. Master Eigen produced his ink case, took a piece of paper from his sleeve, and wrote the words, "The Seki Station is here." "My fellow villagers," he said, "the Seki barrier is here. Now, please return to your homes." This persuaded them to return, and they reluctantly bid him farewell. This was a deep, deep teaching he gave, and it doesn't sound like it was recognized. The Seki barrier is here. Consider that. Where else can it be? Among the villagers who had accompanied him was an elderly couple who'd always been particularly friendly to him. Saying farewell with tears in their eyes, they told him, "We deeply regret that we had such a holy priest in our midst and were unable to receive his teaching. Would you please give us a few words in parting?" Knowing how earnest they were, Eigen readily granted the request. He told them to come closer to him and had them sit facing each other. Then he reached out, grabbed their top knots in their traditional way of doing their hair in those eras in Japan. He grabbed their top knots and bumped their foreheads together. "Ouch!" they both exclaimed. "There," said Eigen, "that's it. Now don't forget it." The ouch you uttered when you strike your head against something was not learned at school from your teacher or from your parents or from books. It comes straight from your own mind. You understand it perfectly on your own. You understand it without any help. No one told you to say it. It's not something you thought about doing either. It was uttered without thinking or questioning. Not thinking of anything, not considering anything is the Buddha nature, the fundamental nature and mind of human beings. It is, in the full sense of the word, nothingness, Mu. It was from Mu that ouch appeared, without pondering or deliberating of any kind. I have a Dharma brother who since died, but he was also teaching for a while. And he also spent a couple of years in Japan at his own little Japanese temple. And one of the things he had done was go to visit Nakagawa Soen Roshi. Nakagawa Soen Roshi was another one of the great Zen masters of the previous era. And Zensen went to say goodbye to him. Soen Roshi was sitting on the Engawa, the raised platform that runs around temple buildings in Japan. And Zensen went to him, and Nakagawa-sen said, "Come closer." And so he did. And he said that Soen Roshi grabbed his ears and smacked his head into his own forehead, which he felt for 3 days afterwards. And hopefully Zensen understood what he was trying to be taught. This mu, absolute nothingness, is not something that's created or established, and it's not something you attain. It is not a thing of beauty or defilement. It does not increase or decrease. It is truly and absolutely unborn and undying. Hence, we provisionally give it the name Buddha nature. Thanks to this move, we see and hear, weep and laugh, sleep and wake, and are able to lead a totally free existence without any problem whatever, after a lot of work. This is what is meant by becoming a Buddha. It is also the meaning conveyed by the phrase quoted above from the Diamond Sutra: arouse the mind without fixing it anywhere. That is the phrase that triggered a deep awakening experience for the sixth patriarch of Zen in China centuries ago. Zen Master Shido Munan, the teacher of Hakuin's teacher, Shoju Rojin, alludes to the meaning in his verses. For example, Buddha is the name for what remains alive after the body has thoroughly died. Become a dead man while you're living. Do as you please, then all is right. There is no jeweled lotus seat in Buddha's land of bliss. Aside from knowing, you have no self or body while you live. Zen Master Linji, the founder of our Rinzai Zen school, said, above the mass of red flesh is a true man of no rank who is always coming and going in and out of your face. There's another translation of that because it is a koan in the Rinzai. There's a true person of no rank coming in and out of the doors of your senses. If you haven't seen it yet, see it now. See it now. What is it that allows us to see, hear, feel, touch, taste, move? Science has explored this a lot, not completely, but we do know when certain nerves are dead, we can't move, for example, or whatever. But what is it? An infant is born already with a personality. It can already cry. It can already move. It can already suck, pee and poop, sleep, wake. And it's known that at that point, the brain development is minimal in this infant. So that as the baby grows, they're able to do more. The brain develops as well. The capacity to think and so on. And right from the get-go, as that baby emerges, They emerge through some level of trauma. It's a pretty tight squeeze. Some of them come in so early that they have to be intubated and put on all kinds of machines and so on to keep them alive so they can grow enough. It seems to me that's some kind of a purgatory for infants. But at any rate, we come in, we get experiences, and those experiences bring us to conclusions as to how to navigate our world. And when we grow, as we grow older, those experiences can be very challenging. If we've got parents that are demanding, if we got parents that insist that a child be a certain way, if we have parents who are projecting their own stuff onto the child, if the child is in an environment that is rife with pain and suffering to begin with, it's a challenge, and the child develops a sense of themselves as being not good enough, and probably a lot of other things. And this leads to pain and suffering. This is the self-image being developed. It is essential to understand how to navigate society. But society can be extremely demanding, particularly the segment of society that we're born into or grow into. And that can result in a great deal of pain and suffering. But the innate perfection of that child always remains undercover. And sadly, many children grow up never being able to free themselves or become free from that pain and suffering. Others have a sense, a deeper sense, and have the good fortune and the good karma to encounter a spiritual practice that is truly effective and to do the work that can liberate them from that self-image and open to and realize and experience and live that true nature that they are, that all of us are, that everything is. And that's why we sit here in this Zendo, doing that work of exploring our consciousness, exploring our reactivity, exploring our desires, exploring sensations in our body, reaching beyond words to open to that innate perfection that we are. And gradually, whether we realize it or not, we are beginning to thin the layer that hides it. We simply need to keep persisting. As you heard yesterday, there's lots of stuff that we bump into as we do our Zen practice. But if we persist, and faith is vital here, as well as what I used to call a great stubbornness, persistence, tenacity, commitment, as well as this perplexity or the sense that there is something. There's a different way of being. There's a different way of knowing that we can open to and somehow are compelled to reach out and try to do that. And it's true. And it works. We keep at it and gradually we become free. And here I would like to share with you once more a story that was of profound inspiration to me many, many, many years ago, and which actually plummeted me into finally going to the Rochester Zen Center. I had been doing Zazen for about a year and a half before that, and I was commuting from where I was living at the time, which happened to be Turkey, to the United States to for a couple of months every year, pick up work where I had been working. I'd been a freelance designer in the Washington, D.C. area. And I was able to just arrive, borrow one of my parents' cars because my father was retired by then. And there are many residential hotels in the Washington, D.C. area. And I would just go to one client in particular who had enough work. He was happy to have me work 16 hours a day and paid me well. And I used to sit at lunch hour when nobody else was in the office and lived there for a while. And then went back to Turkey and enjoyed living in Turkey and working in Turkey as well. A very different kind of work. And one day, one evening, I was in a bookstore, just kind of nothing else to do. And back then, there were almost no books on Zen. There was one of these little revolving wire bookcases. It had maybe 5 books on Zen. One was a translation of Haluin by a translator who's long dead at this point. It was not Norman Waddell. And another was this little book called Zen Flesh, Zen Bones, which I've learned from a number of sources since is very bad translations. But at any rate, I picked it up and started thumbing through it, and something just jiggled in my mind. And so I bought the book, went back to where I was staying, opened it at random. It happened to be this page where it spoke of the story that is attributed to Hakuin, but actually happened to Shido Bunan in 1600s in Japan. And by that time, Shido Bunan was a highly respected middle-aged monk in a tiny little temple in Japan. And it was an era before the Meiji Restoration. And so monks were celibate back then. At least the appropriate ones were. And one day in this little village, a young girl got pregnant, and she was not married. And her parents tried to get her to tell who the father was, and she refused and refused and refused and refused, and finally said, "It's that monk," which was a horrifying statement for people to hear, because he'd been so highly respected, and because he, as a middle-aged monk, and this is a 16-year-old girl, there are a lot of negatives about this. So when the baby was born, the grandparents took it to Shido Bunan, presented him with the child, and I'm sure they were full of anger. It's impossible for us to really comprehend what the significance of that event was in Japan, because in Japan, the individual is not important. It is the society, it is the culture, it is the community that is important. And to cause anybody in the community difficulty, discomfort, inconvenience is anathema in Japanese culture. You don't ask somebody how to get to some place because they will feel compelled to take you there. It's very strong, even in modern Japan. So it was a huge blot on the village and on the family that this baby was born, period. And then even a huger blot because the father was supposedly this Buddhist priest. And so they took the baby to him, and his response was "Soka," which is an extremely humble way of saying in Japanese, "Oh, it does look like that, doesn't it?" And he received the child, raised it for a year. The whole village had scorned him, and so it was extremely difficult for him to simply survive. And of course, in those days, there weren't all the amenities for newborns that there are in our modern societies in these days. And so they said that he carried the baby around on his back like an old grandmother. And after a year, the girl confessed who the father really was. It was another young man in the village. And now the grandparents are even more embarrassed because they have wrongly accused this monk for something that he had not done. And so they went heads bowed and reclaimed the baby. And again, all he said was, so calm. And it's important to recognize that that's all he needed to say. He wasn't holding back. He had tremendous empathy for the pain and suffering in the family. That was his focus. It wasn't anything about why would you accuse me? I'm innocent. There was no point in arguing in the first place, because if the girl said that he was the father, how is he to argue with that? But when they came back and they got the baby back again, he did not feel motivated to say, well, you should have known I wouldn't have done something like that. He simply said, oh, empathizing with the family's grief and embarrassment. And we know the story because the village was so impressed by this that it's come down to this generation. But the utter freedom that is impossible to describe that Shido Wanan experiences in that encounter, in both those encounters, no need whatsoever to defend, fight. He was deeply awakened. And while we can say, well, now what would have happened if it was bandits? What would have happened if it was, some other really extreme situation? Well, he would have responded in appropriate ways then too. But the fact that he responded in the way he did demonstrates to us how we can be that free. And we can. I know it personally. Many people know it personally. And everyone here can too. We all have that same capacity to be free of stuff. It takes an enormous amount of work, but we're already doing it. And as we continue this work in ourselves, we're actually offering increasing freedom to unseen others. And as we encounter other people that we do meet, the degree that we are let go of any need to be somebody important, to be somebody. We have so much flexibility, so much freedom to be however it is most effective in each encounter. And that people feel deeply. So this is the gift of our practice, to be able to uncover that innate perfection that we are. I leave you with that. And I pray that every single one of you continues all the way to the deepest place in your practice for the benefit of all beings. Because as you go deeper, you will naturally live in ways that are more and more beneficial to all of humanity and all of life, not just human beings. It's built in. You can do it. I thank you for listening. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.